It is abbreviated NDC. So he's the technical lead person. And so he tends to be involved in updating Ghana's NDCs and policy advice on climate. He establishes measurement, reporting, and verification systems and protocols. And he's also tasked with some bit on monitoring and evaluation systems, all in the bid to look into climate action. And because of that, he works with a lot of governmental agencies. I will not go into that. But importantly, he's a climate change negotiator for Ghana on several articles, especially or in particular articles 13, 6, and 4 issues. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure we are eager to, like I said, know how Ghana is performing, and importantly, our efforts when it comes to addressing change-related issues as far as climate change is concerned. And so the speaker for keynote number 2 is Dr. Daniel Tutu Benifo. With a round of applause, shall we invite him to the podium? You're welcome.
Please, how do I operate this? Good afternoon, and good afternoon, Professor. I salute you and colleagues. It's good to be here. It's good to be back to campus. I used to be here, and I've seen my professors. I've seen Professor Tre and Professor Awakuzi as well. My job is simple. I came with my colleagues who I work with, Julie and Dan, and I have the honor to share with you the big picture conversation around climate action. Yes. So I would focus only on the part 1 of the slides. I'll briefly set the scene of this conversation and end with some concrete climate actions on the ground. Bear with us if we are not able to cover a lot on research. We also have another slide on research, but I'm sure we'll come back to that later on. So on the big picture, I wanted to highlight the importance of the fact that the policy space in this country is constantly attracting attention of different topics. And climate change happens to be one. Now we are in the era of transition, digital transition, green transition, and climate transition. We are also being confronted with the pandemic, all right? We are also being confronted with public death, right? Many countries are facing issues as to how address issues on jobs and other rest. So constantly, there is competition in the policy space, and I think that's a very important point. And therefore, your research and the research findings must also find its way into the policy space for action. But when there's already competition, then how then do we keep the climate change issues on the table and keep it there for the time that it could find expression in the policy space? But most importantly is also the fact that climate action is also driven by the fiscal space, right? So apart from the fact that there are competing topics, the fiscal space is also gradually being shrunk. And therefore, that is also a limitation on how we can appropriate resources to address climate action as well. The other point is also about and that said, colleagues, is also the fact that there's no denial of the fact that our economies are based on natural resources. The exploitation and the use of natural resources, in fact, determines the fact that our economy is largely based on primary and secondary industries. So we don't have a lot of the tertiary industrial structure as it is found in other places. The fact that the economy is structured on primary and secondary energies connects the developmental space, natural resources, and the factors that determine the use of these resources. And that for me is also a very important point. So I've given you here the extent to which the Ghanaian economy connects very well with natural resources. And just one number that I wanted to indicate here is the cost of environmental degradation on the face of use of these resources. The World Bank estimated that as at last year or so, the cost of environmental degradation to this country, excluding the obvious, the impact of the obvious in the room, or the big animal in the room, is around 10.2%. And the obvious is the 1 ton exploitation of natural resources, including mineral resources. And that is the obvious, the big animal in the room. The other problem that is also facing everybody is also the fact that we need to deal with the pressures from the rate of urbanization in this country as well. And also the impact of the COVID-19 as well. And then on the flip side is also the government agenda to push for a higher economic prosperity of Ghanaians, right? So they have a very interesting flagship programs that invariably also border on how we can speed up industrialization of this country. So we are faced with this confluence of the need to develop, but also being concerned about the fact that as we develop, we must make sure that the economy is not developed at the expense of natural resources. And therefore, the climate change becomes a risk that can also hamper our effort to develop. So many of us refer to climate change as a developmental risk that can also multiply the risk of achieving our long-term developmental prospects. So that's how I want to tackle this issue. So climate change is not separate from the other developmental priorities for this country. So this chart is really about for those of you who are economics, I show my economics here, it tells you the extent of the rent as a function of GDP of the various natural resources as it's contributed to the total national rent. This really emphasizes the importance of natural resources to us. This is coming from the Bank of Ghana, right? And that for me is a very important point. And even if you look at it very well, in 2012 and 2011, where we began to commercially produce oil, right? It found expression here how mineral rent is driving the GDP of this country. Forest rent is almost always important in the 90s, and then even in the late 2000s. You see that the forest rent as a function of oil rent put together is still important. The other issue, therefore, is that despite all these, environmental issues still struggle. And one very important number is the fact that the government spent less than 1.9% of the public expenditure in dealing with issues of resource use and the impact of natural resources. On the flip side, we are looking at the fact that the economy relies on these resources. The cost of degradation is about 10%. The government spends less than 1.2% of the revenues that it gets from the use of these resources to deal with the impact of the natural resource use on us. And that, for me, is a very important point on this slide. So on this, we had therefore looked at how climate change comes to play on top of all those challenges as we found them. So our job in my office is to gather all the pieces of information across government, research, private sector, and all those actors and paint the big picture to government for action. So we've carefully, over time, again, we are not able to capture everything, covered quite a bit of information gathering from the aspect of information gathering, synthesis, and how that could fit into policy advice. So the rest of the slides is about climate information as we have gathered them and how we have used those information to fit into climate action. So as you can see, the heading of this slide is not news to everybody. I'm sure Prof. Amakriji has the better information than I do. And it is no more a subject for the scientists or for the environmentalists. We all know that it's happening, and people are living the different severities of the impact of climate change. We all know that. And the other point is also that we had worked with the national climate experts from the Ghana Meteo Office, from researchers at the University of Ghana. I saw Professor Usu, I think he left, to come up with the climate change evidence in Ghana. And we had looked at a wide range of studies, reports across, and we found out that over the last 30 years, definitely the climate had warmed and is going to continuously warm. And in the worst case scenario, we feel that the warming will get to the level where the net increase will be around up to the level of 3 degrees compared to the pre-industrial era. This figure is a bit different from the global average of about 1 to 1.2 degree rise compared to the pre-industrial era. If we slot in the Paris Agreement commitment, which is supposed to keep it below 2 degree rise, this would probably not be consistent with the aim of the Paris Agreement. We also found out that among all the studies that we looked at, the issue of the uncertainties around the rainfall patterns and its variability had been confirmed by almost all the studies that we reviewed. And then also, very important is also about the fact that over the years, we've also observed that the frequency and the intensity of the extreme weather events are going up. Right, and again, we are happy to share the detailed report as well. So that is the broad, high-level summaries that we present to policymakers. That with all these complex scientific, technical jargons, what does it mean? Right. The other issue is also with respect to what does it mean for us as a country in terms of development. We think that one of the most important implications of this high-level or big-picture implication is also we must have in mind the impact on smallholder farmers. And how do we prioritize action in building the resilience of smallholder farmers? Until 2020, about 50% of our national grid, power from the national grid, came from hydro. Right? It's now around 55% against hydro and thermal. Right? Many studies have also looked into the impact of climate change on the two large hydro dams, right, that we have in the country. And we also found out that is a major issue for everybody. The other two issues that we also found that studies have really looked into it is also the impact of climate change on the coastal line and also on infrastructure, particularly on road infrastructure and also telecommunication infrastructure as well. So many studies have been done in this area. And again, we highlight this very important issues for the policymakers when it comes to climate change impact on power generation, coastal line, and also infrastructure. And of course, the declining impact on, or the impact on ecosystem vitality. That is on the side of the impact. We are also involved in computing the total national emissions, how much we contribute to climate change as well. Right. And we do that every 4 years. And as at 2019, in total, Ghana contributes around 58 million tons of greenhouse gas to the total global emissions. In terms of percentages, it's just meager, right? It's around 0.05% of the total global emissions. In terms of per capita, it's around 1.2 tons per capita, right, over the period of time. The 58 million tons of emissions is supposed to kind of rise on the business as usual scenario trajectory to 100 million tons by 2030 if the drivers of the emissions remain unchanged and if the NDCs are not implemented. We expect that the emissions will get to 100 million tons based on the current policy scenarios we have in the country. One point is also that the 58 million tons, a chunk of those emissions come from about 4 important economic activities. One is, of course, land use modification through deforestation. So definitely, deforestation is a major source of greenhouse gas emissions in the country. We also see the contribution of oil and gas production and use as the next important source of emissions. Then the other one is transportation and thermal power generation. So if you unpack the sources of the emissions, you realize that these are the 4 dominant areas that account for a chunk of the national emissions. But even if you unpack it further, for example, if you take deforestation, you can further unpack it, and you realize that the conversion of forest to non-forest as a result of human interventions through cropping, farming, and also mining play a key role in it. There was a mention of the NDCs, right? So therefore, when we implement our national commitments, we expect to achieve around 68 million tons out of the 100 million tons if we do that. On the right side, colleague, is a map that we constructed to represent the National Vulnerability Index of every district. So we've done an analysis, a quick back of the envelope analysis of the levels of vulnerabilities in the country based on only 2 variables that we considered critical. This is what we call the agricultural-based vulnerability map. So we didn't include the impact of the coastal and cities. This was based on the levels of vulnerabilities based on agricultural households. And we combined about 5 different spatial layers. On one side, we looked at the various climate stresses. On the other side, we looked at the adaptive capacities of the districts. On the other side, we also looked at the sensitivities of each district. And we combined them to get this output. One very important variable in this analysis was the incidence of poverty in each district. And we found out that this map and the poverty maps are quite confounding, and therefore we needed to be very careful how we conclude from this map, right? But definitely, where you have the highest likelihood of poverty per households, you are likely to have high levels of vulnerability. That, we thought, was a very simplistic conclusion of this map, and therefore, when we are advising policymakers, we are very careful how much information we want to deduce from this. The other point is also about the levels of homogeneity of the districts, right? Because the district can be very, very wide, right? So you cannot treat the districts as Kumasi as one big polygon and assign a score to it. So again, we also reflect those weaknesses in. But this is just really to give them a sense of how climate change vulnerabilities can also be reflected in the broader developmental conversation and where we can prioritize actions. This graph is giving you a summary of the emissions, right? So I've already explained that if you look at the emissions here, this is the total emissions from 1990 to 2019. It is growing in tandem with GDP and also growing, though not in tandem, but at a different rate compared to population. Right. So in the case of Ghana, we don't have the kind of graphs that you have in Germany, where emissions and development, GDP, are growing at different rates and at different directions. Right. That's all that we are all aiming at, that we can still grow the GDP and the emissions would achieve a certain opposite direction. That is what. And to us, what can instigate this is it's policy based on evidence. The other one is to indicate the extent of the importance of emissions from forestry. Right? If you take out the emission from forestry from the total national emissions, it's almost comes down to quite several folds of emissions, right? So it's important to include or find the importance of how the net emissions from the forestry sector can influence the total national emissions. That is also a very important point to raise. So with this, I wanted to focus on the policies at the level of the global perspective. So Ghana is quite noted as regularly or rapidly getting involved in multilateral efforts and quickly signing and quickly ratifying and not having the same energy to implement them. This shows, so this is just a bit of more than 50 multilateral protocols that we are part, right? And I think it's good, but I think what we are not doing quite a lot is how we can use the same momentum to drive action on the ground. I know that somebody will say that, but I'm not the one who decides on the resource allocation. My job is to advise, right? So I'm only advising. But I think that we need to do more to drive this work. So this is a summary of what we are involved in. The latest one is our effort to ratify the Paris Agreement, which is the new order that is helping countries to drive climate action. This is a summary of the institutional arrangements of climate action in Ghana. And I wanted to highlight 2 points. The first point is the fact that it has a base, and in the base you see that the role of academia, right? This is a National Climate Change Committee that is a national body that is supposed to guide the implementation of climate action in Ghana, right? And it's made up of line ministries, private sector, CSOs, academia. I'm not sure how they elected the academia's representative, but somebody represents academia. And I'm not sure how the person gathers your views to that place. I'm not able to talk about that, Professor. So spare me if you have any question on that. I'm not able to answer that, Professor. Sorry? Professor, you're always fine. The other one is also on the So we have roles that played by Minister of Finance, the Forestry Commission, the NADMO, and also EcoBank, private sector, right, that are involved in the various spaces when it comes to this. EPA also plays a role in supporting the work of the climate change in the country. A summary of the national level policies. Again, apart from Uganda that I am aware of, Ghana is among the countries with a lot of climate-related policies, both at the national level, at the sectoral level, at the level of the district as well. And I wanted to highlight the importance of the first three policies. So these are broad-level vision agenda for the country that is set to define the long-term prosperity of this country. And there is definitely policy incoherence across governments, and everybody knows that. And that is also a policy risk, because then if the policy is not certain, then implementation becomes an issue. And therefore, whilst we are good at doing this, we also need to be careful about how policies are changed rapidly. In the morning, somebody was mentioning the fact that the national renewable energy target has been shifted from 2020 to 2030. And that is one example. Right? These first four national policies are really laying down the foundation for the climate action to also be implemented. And this is what was already mentioned by our colleague here. There are quite also a bit of sectoral policies that are also critical for climate action. It cuts across energy, forestry, local government, transportation industry. So there are pieces of policy proposals or policy measures that are relevant for climate action that we also built on, Professor. And I feel that it's important to highlight those points as well. So this is to give you a sense of the policies that we have followed that are relevant for climate action. So you can see that in the middle, you see the Ghana Beyond Aid Charter as a very important long-term driver of action, and the CARES program that is supposed to help us address or bounce back better, and all the rest of the sectoral policies that are being implemented in here. You realize that in each one of them, there are pieces of policies, priorities that are relevant for your work here. So it's important that we put together the big picture for you to appreciate this. Zooming in on adaptation, I realized that this conference is on adaptation. So I thought that I should highlight the new focus on the discussions on the adaptation from the global level. The Article 7 of the Paris Agreement defines the new scope of work for adaptation. And it did so by adopting a global vehicle called the Global Adaptation Goal. So the GGA is a new vehicle for action on adaptation among the parties. And it has three very important interrelated focus. One is on how we can enhance adaptive capacities across board. Right. Number two, how we can strengthen resilience. And number three, how we can reduce vulnerability. So in defining climate action regarding the need to build on adaptation, it ought to reflect these broad principles. How do we balance vulnerabilities and also reducing, strengthening resilience? Again, apart from that, the COP had also provided us with a framework for operationalizing the GGA. Right. So it talks about, it introduced a new work program that began this year and it will end next year. The program is called the Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh Work Program on GGA. Right. So the GGA is not enough to adopt it, but you must come up with the modalities. So the work program is trying to set out a framework for operationalizing the GGA. And it has a couple of elements. The first one is about how we can facilitate adaptation planning across board, sectorial, national, subnational, sometimes community level, right? Or joint planning as well. It also set out the importance of integration of adaptation issues into the sectoral, national, community, or district planning process as very critical as well. The GGA also broadly talks about the importance of stepping up the mobilization of climate finance for adaptation as well. And it sets out two levels of resource mobilization. The first one is what they call the adaptation finance in the immediate term, where countries are supposed to up their pledges for adaptation because adaptation finance is not at par with mitigation finance, and therefore the effort is to ensure that there's parity to a large extent. Another point is that the funding for adaptation is now being linked to the carbon market, right? So the proceeds from the carbon market, right, is being levied or had been levied in the past, and that concept has been kept in the current structure, right? So the proceeds from the Article 6 market, a portion of it will be levied at 5% rate, and that will go into the Global Adaptation Fund. That fund is available for countries to support adaptation measures. And that is what is captured as share of proceeds. And very interestingly, the new market, right, the new climate market is also accepting the creation of carbon markets from adaptation interventions that have mitigation co-benefits. So in the past, that was quite unclear. Right now, when you have an intervention on adaptation and the benefit goes beyond adaptation, and you can have a demonstrable mitigation co-benefit of that intervention, you can sell the proceeds, right, in the carbon markets. That I thought was quite interesting. So this is really an important component of the new market that has been established under the Paris Agreement. The other one is also the non-market approaches that is covered under Article 8 of the Paris Agreement, which is not a market approach. It is also a cooperation that allows us to exchange the benefits of two or more countries' cooperation. That is not carbon. So whilst in Article 4, 6.4 and 6.2, the trading is carbon for 6.8, the trading commodity is not carbon. Right? It could be any other benefit apart from carbon. That for me is also a smart way of commoditizing adaptation benefit other than carbon. And that for me is also very important, a very important innovation in the Paris Agreement. So I'll urge you to look at the Paris Agreement, and I'm sure that you find more interesting pieces of information in that particular document. The other one is also a separate communication for adaptation. In the past, we didn't have the same attention as we did for mitigation. Now, the COP or the Paris Agreement also introduced a separate reporting for adaptation, which I think is also a very important step to highlight the progress of adaptation. So here are some examples that we have captured in terms of government policies that support adaptation. I'm not. So this is not to debate whether or not these policies are good or not, but to, in our view, the outcomes of these interventions can support climate adaptation. Because the rationale behind them and the investment behind them, when really well done, could really inure to building resilience, or at least reducing vulnerabilities of the various ecosystems and communities. As I said, I'm not here to debate whether or not it was done well or whether or not it's good or bad. But I think that if we look at it in detail, there are pieces of this information that can be used for adaptation purposes. I refrain from mentioning the names because I think it's quite straightforward, right? I'll pause for a second so they can just digest it. Professor, the one that is quite obvious for me is this one, right? It's quite interesting policy about policy. And because one district, one warehouse for me was a very bold step in decentralizing access to post-harvest storage facilities on the ground, right? And we got this figure last year. I'm not sure where we are right now. I think that it's a very interesting way of doing this. Okay, so next one, Professor. The other one is on cities and local action, right? Again, the Greater Accra Assembly and the Ministry of Works and Housing and the World Bank is dealing with experts on sanitation and flooding. And we thought that that's a very interesting investment. It's a $200 million investment that is going into building resilience and infrastructure for controlling flooding in Accra. But yes, okay. So since it's not ended, right, we are unable to see whether or not the Accra flood will stop, right? But maybe that investment is not meant to stop the Accra floods, but to reduce the impact, maybe, right? So again, that is a very interesting investment that I thought I should highlight. Another very innovative investment that I thought is good to highlight is also the one that borders on local communities and assemblies. And that is also the local projects being done by the UNCDF. It is a very innovative way of transferring subsidies, and they call it performance-based climate resilience grants, to the local assemblies to top up or to ginger their effort on climate action. And it's a resource-based payment type of model. And I'm told they are working with about 15 district assemblies in the country. So it's limited to a number of districts. So the essence is to really kind of support them to take climate action at the level of the assembly. That I thought was a very interesting point as well. Another very important one that I thought was critical is that we spend most of the time dealing with the sectorial or the national conversation, right? But right now, Greater Accra, the AMA, right, has taken up the step of translating the national or sectorial plans into an assembly-wide level program. So now they have their own climate action at the level of the city. That, for me, is a very important way of transmitting the sectorial priorities into like a local level priority program. And I thought that it was good to highlight that. The other action on adaptation that I thought I should highlight is also about how we can manage climate risk. And one aspect of it is also climate transfer or financing climate risk. And there are two very important projects that I thought I should highlight. With the help of the Germans and also the UNDP, there's work ongoing how we can pilot climate insurance program for infrastructure and crops as well. So it's a very difficult process, but the insurance people are able to do that, how they can estimate the risk of crop yields and the contribution that you must pay as a function of the failure of the weather on the yields. So it's a very complicated process, but I thought that that is one of the ways that we can also address the levels of vulnerability and also building or strengthening resilience levels. The flip side is also what informs climate action, right? So our ability to observe the climate systems, our ability to predict, our ability to detect change and inform action is important. So this action, what we call the climate services, is really the foundation of climate action. If it's weak, the rest of the things that come with it will be weak. And therefore, Professor's work on how he can model the climate is critical, right? Professor's work on how he can assess adaptation is important, right? So being able to predict or have a robust climate services infrastructure is very important for climate planning. And therefore, the role of the Ghana Meteo Agency is important. And we all know that they are working hard to modernize the meteorological infrastructure. They are working hard to retrofit some of them. They are also building capacities in trying to sharpen the way they can predict the weather and also project the climate. That is also a very important part of the process. The other one is also about the promotion of and the dissemination of what they do. There must be a seamless infrastructure that allows them to communicate whatever they find to us. The weather forecast is one example where they can forecast the weather for the day, and they will tell us through either the TV, the radio, and these days you can use your phone and get to know of them. But what about the forecast for the future? That aspect is also very important, and I thought that I should also highlight that. The other few ones that then I would end my long talk is that there are also investments in the area of coastal protection. The Ministry of Lands and Natural, Ministry of Works and Housing are very much involved in the brown investment infrastructure in the coastal area. But a little is being mentioned about the nature-based solutions, which I thought that should be our focus going forward. So the construction of the sea defense systems has been with us for a long time, and yet we still have issues with the impact of the changes across the 560 kilometers sea line that we have in the country. The other one is the access to irrigation facilities. Again, I've already mentioned that this one is for large irrigation systems that is being done by the GIDA. The other one is also on early warning systems and risk and disaster risk management. You know, I mentioned risk transfer and risk management, right? So NADMO is also working very hard to kind of help set up different levels of early warning systems across the country, at the level of the basin, at the level of the community, and also at the national level. Again, they have their own challenges. It's quite obvious. The other one is also the building of resilience in what we call the vulnerable climate landscapes. And the focus is largely on the transitional zone and also the savanna area. And I've given you a bit of a flavor of what is being done across board. So, Chair, I have a lot of slides, but I think that because of time, I want to kind of focus on this one because I have quite a bit of slides on mitigation. But since this is not the focus of this event, I want to end here and end with the conclusion. I think we all know these points. I just wanted to rehash them, that the progress that we are making is good, but we still have to enhance coordination and focus our attention towards achieving impact at scale. Otherwise, it will still be working in silos and not being able to kind of bring transformational change as a result of this individual silo-like effort. The rest, I think, is quite clear. I've just rehashed them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Another round of applause for Dr. Bonfe. So I have three take-home words. I have coordination, I have collaboration, communication, and capacity building. Thank you very much. And I like the closing remarks. Indeed, when you were flipping through your slides, I saw mobilizing funds. I thought you would just stop there and talk because we all need funds. We see inadequate investments and so on and so forth. Thank you very, very much. I think Ghana has done a lot. We have a lot of policies, we've made a lot of strides, a lot of achievements, a lot of flagship programs, several things. I'm sure one day we'll see a lot of progress. Thank you, sir. Thank you so very much. We want to go into a panel discussion, and I'm sure some of the things Dr. Boniface mentioned would also come up in the panel discussion. And to chair this discussion for us would be Professor Leonard Amekuji. He's the Provost College of Science. He's a professor of atmospheric physics and climate science. You see, he has climate in his professorial title. And he has chaired several committees. He serves on several boards. And he's PI, coordinator, collaborator on several projects, trying to predict a lot when it comes to climate change and climate action. And I guess he's the right person to chair this particular panel discussion for us. With a round of applause, shall we invite our chair for the discussion? Please clap till he sits down. He's a professor of atmospheric physics. Over to you, Prof. Chair.
No, you should do that, or okay. I shall accept the truth. Okay, well, thank you very much inviting me to chair this session. And in fact, the panel is really going to dwell so much on just our preliminary message that has been given to us. That the talk was very detailed. In fact, I agree completely, and he doesn't know my view about issue on policy. I think that those things we should not discuss them, because in general, I'm a scientist. I have to do my science, and you are you make science with policy, and you're doing very well. And I believe you take a lot of information from all over. I'm very much impressed with the volume of work that has been presented here. And it really tells exactly the picture of what we have in Ghana. I don't think we're doing badly, as said. And this panel discussion will now focus on what next should we do in terms of collaboration, in terms of what direction should we go, and so on. I will have with me some colleagues who equally do so well working in the issue on climate, and so they are really going to be with me here. Please, could you help me open this end? Open the page for me so that I can. Okay, yes. Okay, so the topic that has been selected for this discussion is emerging issues in climate change research, challenges and opportunities for collaborations. I think this is so excellent. The title is excellent, and I believe we have Professor Ben Bamford. I think Prof will be represented by Professor Boatin. Boatin is representing Prof. Okay, Professor Fink Plauborg. Professor Fink Plauborg will be representing there. And then I have my own director of WASCAL, Professor Wilson Ajeri, Professor Wilson Ajeri, who will work together. So Professor Kwame Ejeyi Frimpong, Professor Kwame Ejeyi Frimpong from University of Cape Coast is with me. It's coming here. Okay. So, yes. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have here the panel, and I think we'll have a number of issues to really go through. In fact, as I mentioned, we had a lot that has been discussed, and so some of the issues that were mentioned will focus very much in our discussion. The question here is we are looking at the topic emerging issues in climate change research, challenges and opportunities for collaborations. And I think this presentation was just smart and just exact to really help us take off from. And I will want to ask my colleague panelists, first of all, want to find out some of the issues that's from the topic. If you look at the topic, what are some of the issues that you think we'll have to go through into this discussion? Each of you will give us one, and then we'll start the discussion session on that. Looking at the topic that has been presented. We are looking at emerging issues in the climate change research, challenges and opportunities for collaborations. So as you go through your minds and all that has been presented, and as I mentioned, the presentation today has been... Okay. Thank you. It's okay. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so Professor Ajeri, let's pass the mic. Looking at the issues, what comes to your mind? I mean, all the discussion we have. Just one issue you think that it's very critical for us to look at in this panel discussion. Your mind should be on research, collaboration, and then you put it in the center, the climate issue relating to climate adaptation, which has been the focus of this particular workshop.
Thank you very much, and it's a great opportunity to be with you to share this podium to discuss this very important issue on climate. There are a number of issues which has been put before us on the table, but key amongst them, which drives most of the issues when it comes to climate, is climate data. The question of data availability, data compatibility among the key stakeholders. Because most of the issues on climate cannot be easily dealt with by one discipline, and it casts across. And most often than not, there are challenges when it comes to this. The source of data, the data compatibility, and the understanding amongst the different disciplines is some of the challenges we face when it comes to working on the issue of climate. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So,
thank you, Chairman. Yeah. Maybe I should make this general comment. First, I'm encouraged by the kind of participants we have in this room. For most conferences, you see very old people, very experienced people. But when I look around, it looks as if I'm the oldest person in the room. And that's very good. Young people building your capacities, developing interest in climate change. That shows that we are really at work and that if we get the right support, we'll be able to overcome the storms. Okay, let me talk about the emerging issues first. Climate change, as compared to other areas of science and technology, is relatively new, and therefore it's very easy to find an area to operate. I think what we need to do is to follow the argument, follow the debate, and see where the emphasis are, where the funding is coming from, what their thematic areas are, and then see how we can look at our own capacity and play into this. So this morning, for instance, we heard that the emphasis these days is not on productivity of individual systems and especially crops, but we are looking at the agroecology. We are looking at the resilience of the entire environment, what processes will drive development in a sustainable way. So if you think along your problems in this way, you are likely to find a place and operate within the emerging issues. So it is not a question of listing 1, 2, 3, these are the emerging issues, but you being able to follow the debate, follow the developments, and be able to carve a niche for yourself. And I think that is the way to look at things. For now, this is what I want to say.
Thank you, Prof. So, like to hear from Professor Feng.
Yes, as you notice, I'm stand-in for Uffe Jørgensen, who unfortunately couldn't come, so I'll do my best. My bit on the challenge is to predict weather extreme, because I don't see it's so risky that we have a very steady increase of temperature or a very steady increase of rainfall. But the extreme events, the unforeseen of the prolonged drought and the depth of the drought and the flooding, the extreme rainfall events, that's what I see as a really, really big issue. And then I would like to also give very much credit to Benefo for his contribution today. Yeah. For me, it was spot on. And that was spot on because here I have a little pin where I have a PowerPoint. So during this session, maybe I can be allowed to show the call text from Horizon Europe, what it is about when it comes to needs of adaptation to climate change in Africa. There's a whole call and there's a lot of good text, which seems that Benefo has majority influence on the text in that call. But let's see if I can have the opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so Prof. Yeah, Prof. Frimpong, I think we would like to hear from you also. We would like to hear your view also on the topic.
Thank you very much. Yeah, for me also, it's a great privilege to be here, sharing a table with great minds such as we have here. Well, from my side, I would want to touch on the research operationalization itself. In a lot of cases, I'm coming from academia. In a lot of cases, we like to work in silos for sometimes obvious and sometimes not too obvious reasons. And so that in itself is a huge challenge. And so whilst we are talking about paradigm shift, focusing on sustainability, I think what we should also be thinking about is how do we make our research problem-based? How do we make it participatory, collaborative? And I also believe that whatever research we want to do going forward should have technology infused into it. I believe if we do so, all of us would co-learn and will also co-benefit. So this is what I want to say for starters. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we would like to look at the second issue that I have here. So God, I'm having challenge with my listening, so let me. Yeah, the second issue I have on my table, when we look at the topic, I first want to take how, as researchers, how do we contribute to the big picture of the national climate policy? How do we contribute the future and the national climate policy? You realize that the national climate policy has certain priorities, and adaptation is one of the national climate policy. From what has been presented today, you realize that the policy tends to ensure that we, in times of this, we are able to adapt. In particular, knowing that as Ghana being a developing country, we fall in the category of vulnerable people that are highly vulnerable. So adaptation become a key issue here. So what will be our contribution in terms of climate adaptation in that area of research? Prof. Ejari. We start from Prof. Ejari again.
Thank you very much. I think one of the key ways is to understand what the challenges are when it comes to the vulnerable in the society. Although when it comes to the global scale, maybe the whole country might be encapsulated as vulnerable, but there are communities and local areas which are more vulnerable than others. And therefore, we have to package whatever we do and tailor them towards some of these. Because if you map out the country, for instance, if I could remember clearly, the map shown to us indicated that some of the communities are more vulnerable than the others, especially those where poverty is on the high scale. And most of these communities, it's even possible that people cannot have one meal a day. So our research, our goal or technology development should be driven by some of these, tailored towards those areas. And then we make sure we research, come out with solutions to help address some of these challenges. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. So I would want to find out from you, when you take adaptation, there are issues that we can talk about. Flooding is one of the key issues that we have, that has been mentioned here, and there's another issue which I know that is more in your area, that post-harvest loss is one thing that we're talking about to adapt. How do you think how do we think we can build research, one, into the area in flooding, and then the second one, your own area, which is the post-harvest area. I would like to find out how this can be.
Okay, Chairman, before I answer your question, let me build on what my colleague has just said.
Okay.
In terms of addressing the needs of the most vulnerable first.
Okay.
And this morning, after a presentation on garden eggs and something, there was a question from the floor as to how this person was going to make their results available to the users. I think one thing we need to learn is that the traditional approach of disseminating information probably is not working, and that we need to get innovative ways. What that means is that we should try and build some engagement process into our research so that we don't necessarily need to target the policymaker, we don't necessarily need to target government before we can get an impact. If we can, for most of the research outputs, if we can deal directly with the local people, already we can see impasse rather than looking at the bigger body somewhere that is too busy looking at too many things. Okay, so to build on what he said, this is what I want to contribute. Now back to the specific question of floods,
yes,
and also post-harvest losses.
Yeah.
I think, thankfully enough, we have the human capacity to deal with some of these things already. Climate change is has just come to meet some existing problems. And we already had prepared ourselves for some of these problems. So we have expertise in floods. If you take this university, for instance, we have people who have PhD in those areas. What they need is support. What they need is to be able to get new partners, people with like-mindedness, similar interests that are also into this climate change. And I think that will be a very good starting point to get good proposal that can get attention of donors or whoever is prepared to help, and then we go forward. So once we have the human capacity, and we are also training more people, I think we have the right infrastructure in place. For post-harvest losses, it's the same thing. Benefit talk about even the government building silos and all those things. These are problems we've been dealing with for a very long time, except that we have not been too successful, but at least we have some experience about what doesn't work. So we can now look at what can possibly work and then get things going.
Okay. So can you mention one key thing that you think can work? Possibly Professor Jerry want to contribute to that. So you can shift
thank
to
you
Professor
very
Jerry.
much. I think to some extent, the flooding situation in this country is caused by ourselves. When I was young, you could not see any house built in low-lying areas. If you travel outside to the hinterlands, people build at places which are on hilly portions because you never know when the extreme event of rain with its runoff will come. But now, because everybody wants to be at a particular point, you just move outside KNUST campus. You see that all the low points are being filled, and we are building houses. And definitely, you cannot direct where the water should flow. When it decides to come, it will come. That is one aspect. And then we need good data to be able to model most of these aspects. Yeah. And then know the return period of some of these extreme events, and then be able to adapt to some of these. I think in brief on this flood, that's what I have to say.
Very, very good one. But to mention, I think, Prof. Jerry, one thing that you talked about, stream flow data, for example, modeling these flood events. We need a stream flow. Currently, it's difficult having a stream flow. We have a student trying to work on this within Kumasi, and what we have to encourage the student, for example, to do now, as the last few days, there was a very severe, very heavy downpour. Remember, just about 3 or 4 days ago, she has to go around and then, of course, identify this flood, where we have flood events, so that we can use, have a means to kind of extract this flood data. There's a tool now we understand will help us do this thing. But so data, I want to just emphasize that data is the key thing. That's one thing that we have to. So as we go into carrying out experiments in the field, one thing we have to know is we have to also make sure that all research we are doing, we have to add measurement, how to really gather data around, and this is very key, as you mentioned. And I think I also want to find out from our colleague from Denmark, Profane, what is your view on the same subject, post-harvest loss and then flood issue on flooding?
Yeah, thank you. Post-harvest loss, I'm not sure if it's so easy to solve as just building a warehouse. Then we don't need too much research for that. It's just to build it and store the goodies. So there must be some more I don't know about. But referring to the flooding, I'm just stay on the line of predicting climate extremes.
Okay.
Because if you want to predict climate extremes for the use of citizens, being farmers, being wastewater treatment plants, authorities, and whatsoever, I also agree to that you need data, and you need more data, because you want to downscale the global circulation model to a region and even to a county or even smaller. And then you want to calibrate that downscaling with measured data. So your density of meteorological station in Ghana is not enough. As I see it, I've been here since 2012. I didn't count them yet, but I know. And we also have to work on that those data should be free. I mean, if you look upon the international research communities, and when you publish your paper, your data would be free. Yeah, so everyone can use those data. And if the Met Station has collected data based on taxpayers' money, it should be free for everyone to use. That's my opinion. And when it comes to collaboration, which is also an issue in this discussion here, I still want to show to you that the European Commission and the people behind the Horizon Europe work programs actually knows a lot about the standing of Africa and also West Africa. So you will see in the call text, which give us 5 million euro for collaboration, you'll identify some of the very important statements we have had in this board here. So if you give me in the end 5 minutes, I'll just browse this call on the laptop, and then we can discuss later tomorrow for that.
Exactly.
So
thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, let's give it to Prof. Frimpong. Prof. Frimpong, I think we're still on the issue on flood and post-harvest loss.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yes.
Let me say this. I am a soils person. And
Okay.
so I can say, without mentioning words, that I don't have much to say on post-harvest.
But you
But I
can say a lot
I
in the
can
flood.
I can use the soil story
Yeah.
to talk about flooding.
Okay.
See, and I am very happy for this opportunity because more often than not, the issue about soil is kept at the back burner when it comes to climate change conversation. See, in the recently held World Congress of Soil Science in Glasgow, His Royal Majesty King Charles III, then Prince Charles, the Prince of Edinburgh, asserted, and aptly so, that you see, soil is perhaps the most important natural resource that God gave us. But again, it is the most abused, the most neglected, and the most misused. So, what does the soil say about flooding? Flooding would happen when what we receive, the receipt, and what is going into the soil or across the soil, you discount that and there is excess, it will accumulate. So what happens? How do we develop and manage the soil such that its water holding capacity would improve? Of course, that also feeds into adaptation. It feeds into building resilience and reducing vulnerabilities. So I believe that it also boils down to the issue of prioritization and reprioritization. So if we want to deal with flooding, there is something we call land evaluation. I am not talking about land valuation. Land valuation is putting monetary value on land so that if the land is close to the urban area, it attracts premium price. No. Land evaluation is where we assess the performance of the land for the most appropriate function. So if, for example, here in Kumasi, I see plantain growing up in places where we build houses, and then we have marginal lands that are left and water cannot go through. What do you expect? You have flooding. I grew up here in Kumasi. We didn't used to have flooding the way we have now. So I think that we need to reprioritize, and so that, and when we focus our research properly, especially also on the soil, I think we can also deal with flooding. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, the other issue I want to look at is the natural resources. One key challenge. God has given us a lot of natural resources in this country. And very recently, there has been a serious abuse of our natural resources. Well, in presenting, Ben tried to give us some key things. Ben indicated a number of the minerals. He talks about mineral rent. and then forest rent. My focus want to be on just two. I want to leave the oil, and that one we are not yet abusing it, so I want to leave that one and focus on the mineral and then the forest. In this context, how, considering the high degradation that we're causing in terms of mining, forest, indiscriminate cutting of trees and all that, the question is, this is again a research opportunity. When people are doing this, somehow for us, it's an opportunity for us to really take an inventory on what is being done. And it is our inventory that will be used as a measure to inform policy to take action. So I want us to discuss. First, I want us to take the issue of mining. Let's look at the issue of mining. Then we look at forestry. You can pick the two, and because they are intertwined somehow, we destroy the forest, and then we go to the pick off the soil, and then we mine, and so on. So we can look at the two.
Well, I think from the research point of view, looking at the problem the way you've put it, research will first have to demonstrate the effect of these high deforestation rate on the environment, on the economy. Once that information is drummed home, then the next step is for research to also show how we can use natural resource management approaches to solve the problem. For now, I think most Ghanaians are not happy with the way we are losing our forest, apart from those who benefit directly from the deforestation, like the miners and their accomplices. Most people are not happy. So what science needs to do is to really come out with data to show that this is the extent to which we are destroying the forest. That is roughly known, but then probably we are doing this at a national scale. We have to go down, do this at the district level, demonstrate to people what we are losing and what the impacts are on rivers, on soils, and even on soil quality. Now, a lot of the soils are degraded in terms of pollution. Okay, we need to show all this. And then once that is done, of course, we then need to solve the problem. And we need to also now show and demonstrate how we can use natural resource management approaches to reclaim back the lands that we have lost to deforestation and the other, if you like, land abuses. Okay, that's what I want to say for now.
Thank you. I think apart from understanding and educating the communities on the impact of deforestation, most of these people are also looking at it as a livelihood. And one way would be to also have alternative livelihood measures for them. Because in the interim, if they cannot feed themselves, then they are more or less prone to some of these abuse. Because people will come in, entice them, I will provide ABC, and then let me have access to your land. But if there are other ways of making a living, and if they have a piece of agricultural land and they are supported in a way with maybe, for instance, being provided improved seeds so that they can get high value from whatever they are doing, they could be introduced to cultivating cash crops, high value crops, and the other alternatives made available to them. That could also lessen the tendency to also degrade the land.
I mean, let's give it to Prof. to look at it from his view. And, yes. Okay. Okay. He doesn't want to speak.
All right. Thank you very much. I will take it from where Professor Ajare left off. And this is what I want to say, especially for those of us in academia and those in the research institutes. We need to move away from the vertical approach of research. Of course, we need journal articles for promotion and so on, But I think that we need to rethink our approach to research and make it holistic, make it comprehensive and integrated, so that it's a multi-actor approach. Otherwise, it becomes a we and them issue. So if all of us, as actors, researchers, those who are exploiting the land and the forest, if we would sit together and think through, and then we can actually distill the research questions, we would understand ourselves. Talking about giving them improved seeds and so on is good, but perhaps they don't even think they need improved seeds because they think they should just go and hit the ground and get the gold. But if we all sat around the table and had the conversation, perhaps they would understand the long-term benefit of leaving the soil alone, leaving the forest alone, is much more outweigh the immediate benefit they get from destroying the land. Maybe we can have better research, and that will be resource-oriented to the benefit of all of us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, what about, I was looking at the issue, all well said, but afforestation, we issue of afforestation, I think that, we know that we have areas that really could do very well in terms of timber and so on. In fact, there was a time the country, issue of TEK came to be, and people invested so much in it. I believe some of them are reaping and getting. So it means that we also have to look at some species that might be, that will really are short, will not, just like plantation, they get their plantations and then they will make a lot of money from this. That's one thing that's this thing. And then we also have to look at alternative. For example, currently they are pulling down, cutting down cocoa farms, and then you look, and this cocoa farm, in fact, the people cutting are not the people who really, these are for either their parents or their grandparents. Do you see? If their parents wouldn't have done that. So if these people are really taking on, like you are looking at alternative, we try to see, because the best alternative is the agriculture for them. Can we let them know how they can really look at issue on agriculture and get the best for it? And I think that is one way that we can look at this. But the emerging issue that comes out as our topic, we are looking at emerging issues in climate change research. So let's look at this in the area in terms of emerging issue, all the things we have discussed now, and I myself want to set the ball. One thing that we have talked about is observation. I think it was mentioned by Dan during Dan's Dr. Dan Tutu's this, and he did mention clearly that one issue is observation. The observation is a long-term. We are looking at getting a long-term observation data, and this is one thing that and this observation is very critical. We also looked at predicting of issues around us. Building early warning systems. These are some of the things that early warning system, for example, for flood. This can really come from us. From us, we can really look at issue on the early warning system, because we can build it in terms of whether, I want to categorically mention here, today our weather is improving and it will continue to improve. There have been so much work we have done in improving. Currently, we can monitor storms at the Ghana Meteorological Agency. We have improved on what we call nowcasting, and I think it's an issue that more can be done. We are still not there. We still have issue that we have to be able to get to everybody. And so the key issue that as I have mentioned, one is building of early warning systems, both for weather and then, of course, for flood is very critical. The other thing that I will also want to mention here is the coastal management issue. It's one key thing that he mentioned, and I think it's also one thing that a lot of research can go into it to look at that, because when talk of climate change, you realize that very low-lying areas, there's going to be, and when you have these extreme events, we are expecting the low-lying areas and areas around the coast. These are really going to have a lot of issue, and so coastal management. He indicated that we should look at nature beach solution. And what is a nature beach solution? These are other things I think we should discuss here. Let's see. So I would want to find out emerging issue now from you. Thank you. Okay, take yours.
All right. I think I'm not normally too comfortable with list of prescriptions. That is not what research is about. Research is about looking at the problem and getting a perspective, a right perspective of it, and addressing it. So once you have a shopping list, you are likely to, everybody is likely to be doing the same thing. And doing that, we don't solve the problem. It's good to have a free approach to those issues. But specifically looking at the list that he gave us, this will be things that we will stay away for a very long time. The nature-based solutions, for instance, is where you are looking at the problem from an ecological perspective. Okay, so how can we strengthen the ecology in that area to ensure that nature is able to minimize the risk, and also if the event occurs, nature is able to moderate it. Okay, and that one is more sustainable. In fact, probably it's cheaper to do. And also, once we get it done, you automatically build resilience because you don't address that particular problem in isolation. You're also able to address other issues as well. Okay, so it is something that, though very challenging, is something all of us will have to put our minds to and see how we can buy into that and work with it.
I think also, additionally, making timely information available to end users when it comes to issues on climate change is also very key. Because if you miss the time, you miss everything. Because if you are expecting a storm in a day and that information does not get to the right source, it means they are going to miss whatever they have to do. And I think one of our panel members also did mention the fact that data on climate issues should be free for people to be able to do their research. If that becomes a stumbling block, a lot of young and enterprising scientists do not have access, and people then have to shift into other areas or may do with data which is not of the right quality. It has gotten to the point where data should be freely available, and as much as possible, people are encouraged to work with such data to be able to. And then also, the fact that climate, when it comes to its impact, cuts across almost all the sectors, means that you cannot resolve issues on climate by being a soil scientist or being a climatologist alone. The social scientist person has to be in. The environmentalist has to be. So it's something which transcends different disciplines. And it's time we have to learn how to accommodate and work together and respect each other as equal partners. That is where the challenge comes. When it comes to issues, people think, oh, this one is climate, and therefore the person who is a climate scientist is the one who has to definitely lead and then be at the top. But once there is that sort of respect and equal opportunities for all, you see that it works. If I should give you a critical one example, if you come to a program like WASCAL, WASCAL is a PhD program which trains the young scientists in West Africa, sponsored by BMBF. So for each cohort, 11 countries, each country is given a scholarship. But when it gets here, we do not make distinction between the fact that this person is from this department or that. Anybody who is willing and ready to work with. Presently, we have about 13 or 14 departments involved, either as a lecturer or as a supervisor, whatever role. And when the time comes to supervise students, we look at it. The issue is that you cannot take more than a student, so that everybody feels that he's part of whatever we are doing. And it cuts across 5 out of the 6 colleges we have on campus. So once you bring everybody on board and everybody feels that he's part of it, you see that the contributions come. People are willing to sacrifice and work. What we've now done is also young scientists who are ready to contribute are also brought on board as mentors. And therefore, they work with the students, and then they are able to also contribute. So in the nutshell, what I would say is that the issues we are dealing with the answers are not in one particular domain. And therefore, we have to learn to work together to be able to address this. Thank you.
Just say just a quick one. I think also that we need to up our game regarding sound research database, and also in terms of reliable estimation of climate change impacts, given that there are disparities in regional vulnerabilities. I think also that we need to re-engineer our curriculum in our universities to bring forward the issue of climate change, so that way we also build skills and competencies. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. The key issue that we have mentioned here, we're wrapping up now. I think that this is the key issue we mentioned here is the issue of data. Data become very critical when it comes to climate change research. And we also looked at the environment. We said that, as Prof. Trebwatin indicated, the environment becomes we really have to look at the environment, look at what are the issues around, and then make sure that we play. However, as Prof. Jari said, climate provides opportunity for a multidisciplinary research. I started my studies as a physicist. I had a first degree in physics. My master's was in mathematical physics. Then before I realized there was opportunity to just go and apply it in modeling and into retrieval and all that. There are a number of mathematicians that are needed. There are people, I know my own younger brother and colleague I work with, Professor, the director of research, that's Professor Felipe J. He started from Agric, and again now he's into serious in climate, etc. So climate provides opportunity for everybody, the social scientists, the lawyer, because we have, in fact, there's a big issue when it comes to climate in terms of law. Because when you go where there's the law of the atmosphere is there, the law of that, I think my colleagues from EPA will tell you that over the ocean and all the other processes, the climate provides this opportunity. We also indicated that there's a need to look at the extreme events, very critical. The extreme events are very critical. It's one thing that we should not lose sight. The extreme events are those that really generate, that they are the, I'll call them the forces. They are the forcing mechanism that really induce climate. And we critically have to look at them. We also had to look at the other thing that we also have to look at is how, in general, in terms of the research, we have to look at the opportunities, as mentioned by Fink. Fink talks about the research opportunities. So when you look at the opportunities, the issue we have challenge in getting this opportunity early. But thank God, I think we are doing very well. At KNUST, College of Science, under my leadership, we have procured what we call the research professionals. It means that the university, KNUST, currently don't lack when the opportunities come. We are far ahead because the research opportunity, we will at least have it about 2-3 months so that we can quickly build the team and then research. But know that there is the need to work together. As we said here, we have to work with the policymakers. Dan and others, they are ever willing to support us, provide us the needed assistance. Otherwise, I don't think they will spend their time to be with us here. And so, in all, I think that there's so much opportunities, emerging ones that are coming in the area of climate research. And these, of course, are not without challenges. There are also challenges, but as researchers, we have to sit in. Some of the challenges comes as an opportunity, and we should quickly look at those opportunities and work within. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very, very much, Prof. Insightful discussions. I am a virologist, and so I'm also looking forward to working with a climate change person, looking into viruses, climate change, infectious diseases as a key emerging issue in the area of health. Prof is saying yeah, so I'm sure he's ready to work with me. We are gradually coming to the end of our program. But to do the closing remarks for us, I'll call on Professor Torsten Rodel Berg to kindly do this for us. And then remember, we have the poster session, and I'll pick on the poster presenters. In a few minutes, I will ask them to come and pitch what they have on their posters, just to, spice us and build some level of interest in us. So please get yourselves prepared. In a minute, please. A round of applause for him, please.
Thank you very much, Madam, and thank you for letting me give the concluding remarks here. I think I'll try to pick up from synthesis of what was discussed in this panel, and also something that I myself tried to touch upon in the morning session, and that is the concepts of knowledge intensiveness and also knowledge sharing. This idea that a sustainable transformation actually requires both knowledge intensiveness and it requires knowledge sharing. It seems quite straightforward, but like most things, it's not necessarily the case. The realization that knowledge sharing is a prerequisite for a transition to something sustainable actually comes from a global review study carried out by a huge research team headed by Jules Pretty in 2018, where they looked at which factors globally actually contributed the most profoundly to transition towards sustainability in agriculture. And what they found was that, of course, knowledge sharing in the shape of rural institutions for cooperation. And rural institutions for communication of things. And what they singled out was, for instance, living labs. It was cooperative structures, and it was farmer field schools. And I think most people in this room would be aware of the concept of farmers field schools, where research is actually in a very, very tangible way being taken to farmers, and also in a very demand-driven way. And one of the and what this really points out is and I think this is also some of the one of the tenets of the call that Finn was referred to the needs-based adaptation to climate change. the imperative of making sure that the research that's carried out is actually needs-based. And needs-based means felt, something that's demanded by the users. And the users in this case being farmers, many of which happen to be smallholders and not necessarily good at articulating their needs. But knowledge sharing actually really depends also on the knowledge intensiveness that we as universities actually represent, what we find in universities. So as I alluded to this morning, and I think that Dr. Benefo from the who was actually giving the keynote earlier on, what he also pointed out, I think he confirmed is that collaboration, getting rid of the silos and going beyond getting rid of the silos, but also collaborating broadly and interdisciplinarily, cross-disciplinarity is actually what is the way forward. And that, of course, again has to be something we have to make sure is demand-driven, and the demand can be articulated through institutions such as living labs or, as I said before, farmer field schools. And much of the research, and this is actually my point here about this collaboration, I think we have a golden opportunity here because we've seen a lot of excellent research being carried out of course, under the auspices of the FFU and the NIDA supported, but also in general, there's a lot of excellent research being carried out at KN University, Cape Coast, UG, what have you, and also, of course, regionally. And some of it, and I will just mention some of the things that I find particularly demand-driven and particularly in demand, particularly applied, is some of the irrigation research that I've seen carried out. And I've also happened to be so lucky to visit some of the field sites. And I think this is very much a case of something that's extremely demand-driven and therefore is likely to have quite an impact. However, arguably, for that kind of research to actually, what can I say, to optimize the impact of that kind of research, collaboration across universities, and you can't get enough of that, is really would be a very, very good idea. So I really, as I said this morning, I really could imagine some sort of consortium that could, if some sort of consortium, a research consortium on climate change in agriculture, something along the titles of this workshop, if that could appear and make its mark in research applications and so on, this is something that would really be quite, but of course the research has to be applied, and then I gave the good example of the irrigation studies and so on. If that kind of thing could appear, then I think the research could not only be well funded, it could also be extremely relevant to development here and in other countries as well. So thank you very much. I'll be brief here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So shall we have the poster presenters on stage? Poster presenters on stage. There's, forgive me if I'm unable to pronounce your name very well. There's Kedish Gonfa, Stephen Opoku, there's Christiane Labi, AEC, there's Torsa Godfred Abe. In 30 seconds, you want people to come and look at your poster, so kindly in 30 seconds, and I'm going to be very strict on the time. So in no particular order.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody. My name is Amabrago Kantan Kajima. I'm from the Rascal Fraternity, particularly from the University of the Gambia, where our emphasis is on climate change and education. You could also call it awareness creation. And I'm happy to be a social scientist in the space of what is generally known as a science subject. And I should say that the mother of everything we are doing here today is our ability to trickle down the information to the different stakeholders who need to get the information and work with it to be able to adapt or mitigate what we are talking about. And so my research is looking at pathways into climate change awareness creation. And it's a part or the baseline to a research that is being done. And what we sought to do is to review existing pathways, looking at it in terms of the different settings, the different audiences, the different geographical locations that emphasis has been on, and the different themes that are circling this, so that we can know which pathways to use in our sub-region. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So kindly go and look at Amer's poster.
Good afternoon to everyone once again. So my name is Ohene Asa Bosompem from the University of Ghana. I am a PhD student, and I'm working on carbon sequestration among smallholder farm systems in the transition zone of Ghana. So my poster out there is simply going to be talking about carbon sequestration. So I'm basically looking at carbon stock among different conventional smallholder farm systems in Nigeria. So you would have the privilege of getting to understand the variability of carbon stock in different arable smallholder farming systems in the transition zone of Ghana. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ohene.
I'm also Samuel Aye Osei from the Department of Fisheries and from the Faculty of Biosciences from UDS, and I stand on behalf of Dr. Christian Labie Isi. We are doing a presentation on the perception, and we are trying to look at the awareness fisher folks have on climate change, and also we are looking at the sustainable way for fisheries and how they are really aware about that. We took a look at some demographic features and data, and we made some analysis to check whether they really have this knowledge on that, and that's it.
Thank you very much. Perception of climate change.
Good afternoon. I am Godfred Abitosa, and then I'm a PhD student on the Fury Flood Project, which is current and future risks of urban and rural flooding in West Africa, which is an integrated and analysis and ecosystem-based solution that we are looking at. And I'm working with Professor Leonard. So this one is actually an ongoing project. So this one we are presenting a part of it, which is based on Accra, to look at flood, extreme rainfall and then flood over Accra, which is actually towards a prevention and then a mitigation solution for this event over the region. Thank you.
I think flooding is always very important, so kindly go and visit his poster.
Okay, my name is Amma Frema-Quanten from University of Ghana. We are looking at the impact of rainwater harvesting on the livelihoods of locals in the dryland areas in northern Ghana. I have so many interesting findings for you. Basically, we are looking at the impact of the one village, one dam on the livelihoods of people in the northern region. And then also, most importantly, we are looking at how the water availability affects work-life balance of women in these localities. I have interesting findings. Just come to my poster and hear more about it.
Thank you very much for selling your work. Excellent.
Thank you. I'm Grace Elom Ayayi from University of Ghana. And my topic is on biochar amendment to 2 tropical soils, which are acidic in nature. And I'm looking at the effects on water holding capacity and then phosphorus uptake by soil. So you can also visit my poster.
Well, she said you can. You can visit her poster. Your name?
My name is Goso Kwashi from KNUST-TEK. in my poster presentation, we'll be talking about cocoa, the effect, how we can use potassium and mycorrhiza to help cocoa to be able to withstand drought conditions. So if you come to my stand, you'll be able to learn more about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Cocoa is very important. I love chocolate, so I will definitely visit you and ask you a lot of questions. A round of applause for all the poster presenters as we look forward to visiting their posters. We are ending. And we will do a short prayer to lead us in praying. I will kindly call Professor Nathaniel Bwedi to lead us in the closing prayer.
Shall we pray standing? Almighty Father in heaven, we are so grateful for a successful day. We thank you for good weather that you gave us right from the morning till now. We ask, O Lord, that as we continue tomorrow, you will be with us and guide us through tomorrow as well, so that we will have a very successful conference. We thank you in Jesus' mighty name. Amen.
Thank you very much. And on that note, thank you so very much. We will see you tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock on the dot. The program hasn't ended. We still have the poster viewing sessions. Like they came to sell their ideas and their research output. Kindly visit their posters. Network as much as possible. Don't run away. There's one announcement. Those coming from...
Yes, who have requirements for refunds, please make sure they are in today, because we have only one day. Otherwise, you go and I'll wire transfer your monies to you. So do it today. Okay.
Kindly,
thank you very much.
if you have a receipt, you need refund. Kindly see Hannah, Mrs. Hannah Aisen. She's outside. She's in a white T-shirt and a black trousers. Thank you and have a restful evening.
All my beautiful ladies who wanna link up, make wanna send me location. Me and my homies having a drink up. Aqua safari with your vacation. 5-star life. Just keys moving like dolphins. And you know we got ice on ice. Big boys know they like talking. What else?
I can't let you go, 'cause of the grace for your body.